Welcome back from lunch. We survived lunch. Okay, so let's do something fun. Let's do this. Well, I'm gonna save the puzzle. That's the real fun thing, the jigsaw puzzle. But before we do that, I have another one I want you to. We're gonna look at here. It's called Introspection tutorial, and we're gonna do the Parse HTML tutorial. Somebody at the break asked me about APIs and frameworks. It's not really what I'd call true Objective-C programming. This is not supposed to be an iOS class. This is actually supposed to be an Objective-C programming course. However, what I'm going to do, I don't have it with me on this computer, but what I'm going to do is dig up some stuff for Facebook and for Twitter and stuff, and then I promise you we'll do some on the Saturday that we meet on the 21st. We'll do some fun stuff with some APIs. But the APIs is a matter of dragging and dropping something into the project and making an instance of that object. It's like taking somebody else's objects, loading it in. I can actually show you a couple of the APIs today for audio and video, to put a video file in there, put an audio file in there. But for the most part, it's not really programming. It's like plug and play, with somebody else's code, which is okay. It just doesn't show you very much for Objective-C, when really the focus is looking at the application of Objective-C being used in these applications and seeing how we're programming the parts of it. So anyway, Introspection is our tutorial choice right now, and then we'll also do plist. Plist is an interesting one as well, and we'll save some data with that as well. So, all right, so let's see. Here it is, Designing with Introspection. So, as usual, let's go ahead and open up a brand new Xcode project. And in the Xcode project, we're going to select a single view application. Same thing as we've been doing before. Actually, if you want to experiment, you can select some of these other ones. The only thing that's not going to be interesting is this empty application. It has no view controllers and no views in it at all. We saw this tabbed view application. If you take the iOS programming course, iPhone, iPad application development course, that's the one I'm teaching next term. We go through OpenGL, we go through utilities, applications, and the multi-detail because it's really for iOS development. It's a continuation of this course. This is the beginning part of it.
Is it on weekdays?
It's on the weekday. It's on Mondays. I'm not teaching it on the weekend. There's a slight possibility that we haven't offered enough weekend classes, and if that's the case and they start adding one, I'm going to be the first person they're going to ask because I'm the only one not teaching on the weekend right now. So I have a strange feeling. This is what happened with this class, actually. This class was never on the schedule. This class was created at the last minute. I have a strange feeling if they make me do that, I'll have the continuation of this one, which is the iOS application development. So this is really part one. The other one's part two. And part two of this is when I go through some of the other, because it's iOS. I usually do the frameworks in that class, like the Twitter, the Facebook interfaces, the cloud services, OpenGL as an example, some game type programming, but it's really not, it's too far advanced right now actually for if you're just trying to learn Objective-C programming as a base. It's I don't want to jump because it's a totally separate class in itself, and it's basically labeled as iOS application development, not Objective-C programming. So long story short, there's a 60-70% chance that class might actually be offered on the weekends. So we'll just cross our fingers and see what happens with that. It depends on how the registration goes. If what you're saying is true, I don't think they offered enough weekend classes. So I'm thinking they might gonna have to add some anyway. And if they do, I'm not teaching any, so it's my turn. I have to. So anyway, not my favorite, but if I have to. Well, this class wasn't on my agenda either. But I'm happy I did it. Anyway, so are you. No. All right, single view application. As long as we don't have to smell flowers. Now watch when he comes in. It's going to smell like flowers. I know it. I'm not the only one who smells it. I can't be the only one who's smelling it. All right, so what are we doing? Introspection. So I'm going to call this Introspection. Introspections. I'll put an S on the end just in case I have to load up the finished product. I don't want to call it the same thing. Go ahead and click on next. The other thing too is with this class you can sort of get away with the iOS class, you just sort of get away without having a MacBook if you're sharing one. The other class, oh, it's hard to get away with not having a MacBook on that part 2 of this course. So, which is the iOS application development. That is a MacBook required kind of environment. Otherwise, you're just, it's more development than this. So it's just definitely more required. Is there someone at the door? Oh, I was hearing something. All right, go ahead, press on create. We got our application created here. That was the fun part. Now we're going to go and see what else we got here. We're going to talk about dynamic binding. So this is an iOS application. This is a Objective-C programming concept. It's called dynamic binding. Like Java, everything is dynamic. There's no static data. C, C++, static. Java, Objective-C, dynamic. Which is why Java makes a good language for Android, because Android's a dynamic running environment platform, JVM stuff in that, or the default kernel for an Android phone, versus iOS, which is the same concept actually. So allows dynamic binding, a feature that makes it possible to postpone decisions about what classes we're dealing with until runtime. So the purpose of this tutorial is to put a bunch of stuff there on the canvas, or on the window, the view, and then see what it is while we're running, and then change it while we're running dynamically. So in order to make this kind of decision, you need to be able to determine exactly what class or classes we're dealing with. One of your assignments works with this concept of taking an object, figuring out what is this object. Are you are you an instance of that class, or are you an instance of that class? And if you are, then we'll change some property. Or also checking to see, does an object have a property? Do we have this property associated with us? And if we do, then run the property. If not, don't run the property, or do something else. So we did this part where we created a single view application. Now we're going to create the interface. We're going to drag a view. I'm going to show you views inside of views, and this is the wrong way of creating a multi-view application, by the way. You don't want to do this. And then let me just do it, and then I'll tell you what you don't want to do. Normally, you have this thing here that represents a view controller. We have the view controller here, these classes that go along with this view. We have in here a thing called a view. This view, it's a UI view. Here it is. I don't know what happened there. This view is inside of the view. So I'm putting 2 views now. I'm dragging, let me stop for a second here. If you come down here at the bottom, it should have come up with view. There it is. Oh, here's our view here. Hello. I guess I dragged it already. There's a UI view. It didn't come up. Here it is. I have to scroll down, it looks like. Or type in on the bottom if you're finding it in the library, UI view. What we want is this view thing here. It's not a container view, it's a view. So if I put now I have 2 views I just dragged in here. If I press on this little arrow to the left here and open it up to see what I got, I see I have a view, and then I have a view, and I have a view. Technically I have a multi-view application, right? And they're layered. So whichever one's on top is the ones that are going to show. And then I can hide and show the different views. So before we had storyboard, people were doing this, and I think it was just ridiculous. You'd have one view controller, you stick, in this particular case, 3 different views in here, and then you selectively hide and show different views when the users click on buttons and stuff. Oh my god, that's confusing. Because each one of these views has all the components inside of the view. It's a hierarchical perspective, but it's all in one controller. And it's all put together in this weird, I mean, because they just, just go like this here. You got all these views in here. Tons of little views. And they're all nested together. I have an app that was put together this way from a very, very long time ago. And you look at it, and it's just like 25 of these suckers on each side. And it's all in here. In one view controller, controlled by one. It's so confusing. That's how you can really make a really bad app. We don't want to do that. Instead, what you want to do is do a view controller. Put a view controller out here, use the view inside of another view controller and have it linked out that way. Then you have a proper model view controller perspective. So going back to that model view controller thing, that's really kind of an important concept. So I'm going to get rid of all these views I put in there. You don't necessarily want to do that. But we're going to stick a view in here, only because I want to show you the separation of the views. This is a subview of the main view. So stick a view in here. Make the view small enough so that you can put it somehow. I'm gonna change the background of this view so I can actually, that's the tint color. Hold on a second. Let me change the background of the view. I'm gonna make my background green, and my outer view, I'll just leave it white. Just leave it white. So, and now I can see the view in here. If you have all the views piled up, you gotta move it around and click all over the place to find all the different views. It makes for a sloppy app, long story short. So don't do that. But for this case, it makes sense for what we're gonna do. So drag a view from the library, put it on the window, put 8 labels into the view. And you should have a large white space with a UI view object containing the 8 labels. I made mine green. The other components are gonna be on the main view. So here's our view. This is what our little thing looks like. We have a view and we have a view inside of a view. And we're going to stick 8 labels on it. So this is the part I'm building right now. I'm just doing mine backwards. I'm going to put mine on a green background on a white instead. So let me go ahead and put 8. Let me drag 8 labels in here. The reason why we're putting so many on here is we want to see how to control all these guys all at once. We're going to control them all together dynamically. So you don't have to put anything on the labels. Just drag 8 labels and stick them in the view. We'll just leave them alone. 2, 3, 4. And actually, here's another trick too. You can go put 4 of them in here, or put as many as you want. Press the Shift key, select them all, and then select copy, and then paste. And then drag them where you want them. Now I got 8 of them in there without having to drag them all. So you can copy and paste the components if you want. If you press the Shift key while holding on to them, you can select them all and then drag them together if you want. So that's the quickie way of making 8 of them there. So I'm going to change, I'm going to change background. I'm going to go orange. We're going to go festive today. So there we go. I'm going to put another label out here. And I'm going to call this one my app title. There we go. Because we're going to change this title too. We're going to change this characteristic. I'm going to center it in here. Change the font to something big. That looks pretty good. Very good. And so you can see when I move the view, it's a subunit. It's a subview out of the main view. It actually moves all together. Alright, so let's say I take a look back here at the instructions. I got my main view out here, I got my sub view, I got my 8 views, and I'm going to put 4 buttons on there. So it's going to be test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4. We're going to put labels on these buttons because we're going to do something with them. Functionality is going to be programmed for them. So I'm going to put some buttons out here. And I got one, I'm just going to call this one test 1. Test 2, doesn't really matter where I put them or what order. Oops, test 2. It's like test 2. Test 3. And lo and behold, test 4. Alright, so I got my buttons on here. I don't really have to do anything fancy with this. I'm just going to kind of make it so it shows up nicely on the page. There we go. Alright, so let's see. I have button 1, 2, 3, 4 label. Got all the components that I'm going to want. So now we're going to do the wire the action events for each one of the buttons. And we're going to call it button 1 press, button 2 press, button 3 press, and button 4 pressed. So let's see. You can call it anything you want actually. So click on my little tuxedo over there. Get this over here. Switch over to my viewcontroller.h file and go ahead and drag and connect. This you should be able to do by now. If you have been following along with any of the tutorials this morning or yesterday or the last weekend, this is a no-brainer. So I'm going to go ahead and do this quickly. But you should be able to do this without further instruction if you've been doing it. So button 1 pressed. And now I'm going to change the ID to UI button. Change your IDs to UI button because we're going to get the object by its ID. So we know it's a button. So this is one of the reasons why I always change it. But over here, change that type. Don't leave it on ID. If its ID is generic. If it's a UI button, it is a UI button. So we can say, give me all the UI buttons. Or if we wanted to, we could say, give me all the IDs. That's all the components. Hide them, show them, do something to them as a grouping, which is what we're going to do with this. So I'm putting it on a button. And this is on button in here too, by the way. So it's UI button. So change them to buttons. Actually, the current version actually works with ID on there too, but because we're a little upgraded from here, but it's okay. We'll just put them on button. So go ahead and do the touchdown event or one of the other ones. The other thing too is you may also not have realized you can actually do multiples here if you want to as well. You can do all of the events. It's kind of confusing, however, if you try to put different activities on each one of them, like touch up inside, touch down, touch on the outside, touch on the left side, right? You know, it's hard to tell what in the world you're touching, so how that's working. So, so this is button number 2, pressed. Change the ID to a UI button. There we go. And let me get number 3 and number 4 going here. And you don't have to do the same one for each one. You can experiment with different actions as well. Button 3 pressed. And lo and behold, button number 4 pressed. Stick it in the middle. Doesn't really matter what order you put them in. I messed it up because I didn't leave enough room on the bottom, but I got this going on here. Okay, so I got my buttons there. Now in the vController.h file, you're only going to declare the action method for the 4 buttons. You don't need the IB outlets for anything else because we're going to get at it by what they are. They're labels. So we're going to find out which controls in the view by inspecting the properties of the object inside of the main view using introspection. This is why they call it introspection. So here I'm going to go through the code before I cut and paste it and put it in there and show you what I'm talking about. So we've got a loop here, and this loop here is for loop. It's very similar to C, C++, Java. The for loop says, for the UI view, a view, like this is like saying for integer I, and then we get this in. So in says in, this is an array, by the way. So self.view.subviews is really an array of all of the views, all of the subviews inside a view. It's actually all the view components. So if you remember the first weekend, I may or may not have shown this to you, I can't remember at this point, but we have a view hierarchy. So everything comes from view components. So a button, a label, a slider, all this stuff has a lot of stuff in common. They're all view components. So as a grouping of views inside and the subviews inside of the views, it's an array of objects, essentially, is what we're getting. So this is like saying for I is equal to 0, I is equal, for integer I is less than 1, I plus plus, you know, when you get in C, C++, everything else. In Objective-C, it's, if I were saying this with I, it would be integer I in, you know, everything less than 12 or something. So the in is our iterative kind of looping mechanism. We don't have this in C, we don't have it in C++, we don't have it in Java, but we have it in Objective-C. It comes in handy. So you can put an array on this side over here or a grouping of some sort. Let's see. No flowers and no smoke and no dogs and no cats. Good job. All right. So on the left-hand side, we're looking for views inside of the subviews. And then if the inside of the view, it is a member of the class UI label class, meaning it's a label, then we're going to set the background color of the label to the red color. So without doing anything else, I can take button press number 1, hello, edit, copy it, and put it over here into the projects. So I'm not making any of these properties is what I'm saying. So instead I'm going to come over here to the viewcontroller.m, pick button number 1 because it doesn't really matter what button you put this in, but put this in one of the buttons. And what we're putting in the buttons is we're going to change now the background color of the view to red. So let's go and run it, and I'm going to show you what this does actually. In the view that we're looking at, and all the subviews of the view, so this is the view, this is a label. If I press test number 1, see how the background of that view, that's called the label, that background got changed to red. These guys are also labels, but they're in a different view. They're not a subview of the main view. This is a subview of the main view, but it's not a label. It's a view. So of the outer view, all the subviews of the views that happen to belong to the class is a member of the class UI label, which the only one out here is this guy here. This is the only label we have out here. So watch this. I'm going to do another label here. I'm going to stick it down here on the bottom actually. I'm going to put here another label. Whoops, label. Did I spell that right? No, I did spell that right. Label. Label? Label. I don't know why it looked funny to me. And I'm going to run this again. Anything that's a label. These are buttons. They're not labels. That's a view, not a label. But if I press the F, oh, it's on the bottom of the screen here, but if I press it, you see this one turned red too. It's hard to see, it's on the bottom of the screen, but that one's on the top. This one scrolled down too far. That label was also affected. Hard to see, it's down here at the bottom. But it got changed to red as well. So I'll move it up for the next test here. Actually, I'll just stick it. I'll just stick it up here. I'll put it right above here. I'll move these guys down a little bit. And so you see, it's a UI label. So all of the labels can be hidden, shown, change the background colors, do something to it. So we see both labels, and both labels get affected by it. Because both of them are labels. And we're looking for specifically as a member of labels. So now we have how about a view? So the second test here says it's the same loop as before. For the UI views, a view in self-view subviews. Check a look at a view. Is it a kind of class, a UI view class? It is. We put one in there and it has 5 labels in it. If it is, then change the background color to blue for the view. So if we do this one, we see the background color is going to change to blue. And where are we going to see that one? Let's just change this one for a second here. We'll put this one in number 2. Following right along the lines here. Paste. So now this green view, which I changed the background to green, we'll change to blue. But look what else we did. They're all views. They're all UI views because of inheritance. So a view, background color, UI color, red color, oops, excuse me, right here, blue color. But this is the problem here. UI view class. Well, they're all hierarchies of the same class is what I'm trying to tell you. They're all views. Just like person is a person, employee is a person. So if I said change all the people and I had person, employee, staff, janitor, teacher, and I had all these things, but the core object was, well, just so NS object, change all the NS objects. They'll all get changed. Change all the people, they're all people. If you go higher up the hierarchy like we did with the label, none of that other stuff is labels. That's not a label. This is not a label. These aren't labels. These are buttons. They're not going to get changed, but all the views in the hierarchy are going to get changed. So it's a way of inspecting the object to see what its object relationship is in terms of a hierarchy. It's more than a hierarchical perspective. It's more of an identity perspective, and that's why they call it introspection. It looks inside of the object, see what you are, what's in there, find out what you are, and then change you. So here's another interesting one for ID. What are we going to do with ID? We want to make it generic. ID is a generic data type. It stands for any type of object. They're all views. They can all be IDs. They're all going to be the same. So for the idea view, where it's in self view subviews, if a view can perform an action, and what's the action? Well, it's an @selector. Remember the @selector? We did it with a couple of things already. With the timers, it runs a method for us. And what's the method we're going to run? Set text. We're going to set the text with sender. Then if that is true, then set the text to hello. So let's take a look to see what this one does. If we have a set text, then it's going to set the text to hello. We'll make this one number 3. Or actually, we'll make it number 4 because number 4 showed up in my lineup here. So this is going to be my number 4. It doesn't really matter which one you're doing. These are all just tests we're going to put in. So button number 4 is going to set the text to hello if there's a set text label. Excuse me, a set text property. So let me make sure I can see everything here. And I press 4. And I got hello and I got hello. There's no set text on a button. There's no set text on a view either. And inside of the view are the labels. There are set texts on the labels, but they're not, they're subparts of the view, and we're just talking about the view. So everything from the outer perspective, the only thing that can be set is the labels. You can't set a text on a view. Doesn't work. This is a view. The green part's a view. And the buttons, these are buttons. There's no set text. There's no set text property on a button either. There's caption button that you can set, but there's no set text. There's text though. It shows up on the label of the button. So let's take a look at the last one. The last one's kind of interesting. The last one's going to go inside of that UI view. So we have 2 loops. So we're going to go from the outer view. If it is a view, if you are a member of the class UI view, which is that green view that we put in there, then for the labels inside of the green view, then set the background color to green color. Ooh, that's going to be hard because the view is green, but we'll just take a look here. I think I'm missing a semicolon. I mean, I'm missing a bracket, but let's just see what happens with this. So this is number 3, button number 3. I'm going to change the background color now because otherwise I'm not going to be able to see it. And I'm going to need to put in an extra one of these guys in here. It's either better take one out. So I got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Put another one in. There we go. Now I'm going to actually set, so this is button number 3. This is already green. Not such a good color choice. So I'm going to change the green, make it purple. There we go. So for the view, inside of the view, change the background colors of the UI label, I think, but just let me refresh my memory here. This is the last one in the number 3 button. Press number 3, changing the labels. So if it's a UI label, change the background color to green. So let's see what happens. And this is test number 3. So I got pink. We run test number 3. Now we got green background labels on colors. Because these guys didn't change because we said if it was in the view. So we took the UI view for the is a member of a UI view in the UI view, which is this green, well, purple UI view now. Then for each one of the labels inside of the subview, change the background color to green. So it's kind of reviews the concept of being able, and then you can work them all together if you want to, actually. There's number 3, there's number 2, number 4. So you got them all working kind of. Some of them are counteracting each other, but they're all sort of changing the way something is looking. Anyway, so the purpose of the the purpose of the tutorial was basically show you, and this is one that's called Introspection, basically to show you how to get at view components dynamically at runtime to change the behaviors about them. You can hide, show, change the background color, foreground color, make a view visible, make a view go away. And people used to use this to the extreme where they'd have everything all in one view controller, and you had 5 or 6 different views and you didn't show each one of them. Kind of complicated. Not a good design pattern. But it does come in handy for getting at objects dynamically. It does have a purpose, but it's just not one you want to use for navigation. It's more for control. So let's see. Little thing, what did we do? The first looks at the subviews of the main view. Uses the isMember of class. Now we did this on UI components. You can do this on people and employees and objects as well. You can find out, one of your assignments is going to have you do this actually. I think it's the second or the third assignment. Maybe the first one. In fact, you can do this with the ships as well. So, and I think that's number 5 or number 6 with the ships, because you're going to have cargo ship, cruise ship. Let's just talk, I'll just make something up. If you have a cargo ship and a cruise ship, you put them into a ship array and they're all ships. They all can be held together as a ship. And then you pull a ship out and you go, is it a member of the cargo ship or is it a member of the cruise ship? Or is it a member of this class? So this method, this check here is member of class. Allows you to find out what this thing is. And if the object is something, then count it or do it, treat it some certain way, perform something on it. Or you can find out, is there a method? Does the property work? Does the method work, like the set text? If it does, then run it. If not, then skip that item. So it's kind of like if you had a bunch of people objects in an array, and you ran the people objects so that you put in their employees, and you put in their staff and students and teachers and administrative staff and everybody, and they were all working at a university, and you pulled out of the people array and you say, what's your student ID? Well, the teachers don't have student IDs. They're not going to have that method return student ID or something. So you'd have to check each one of those objects to see what it was. How many students do we have? I don't know. We got to count them up. You go through the objects. You figure out: are you a student? Are you a student? Are you a student? Are you a member of this class? Are you a member of this class? And then you figure out what the object is. Because dynamically, you're going to have all these objects in your application, and you don't know what they are. You're developing a game as an example, and you've got knives and guns. Well, this is a video game for violence. You got bombs and grenades and all this other stuff, but they're all objects and they're war components, and they're all in a bucket. And the avatar pulls something out of the bucket. What is it? Are you a member of the bomb? If so, then subtract the number of this you have and use it. And it's going to do this. It's going to have some different effect than the shotgun or from the slingshot or whatever it is you happen to be pulling out of the bucket of items. And then you can randomly create a bunch of items and stick them in the bucket. So it makes the game a little bit more interactive. You start the game out, oh no, okay, I got 3 knives and I got 2 hammers or something. Oh, bummer, you know. I wanted 5 hammers and 1 knife or something. And then you can use the components interactively with objects. So it allows you a lot of flexibility in terms of creating random behavior and putting objects together, grouping them together, and using them all as a grouping, and then figuring out what they are. So anyway, that's introspection. Looks like that. I don't have to go through all this label stuff, but is kind of class is also another one. So the two important checks here are, is a member of class, is kind of class, has method. So the other one is the, can perform action method, which is the set text is what we did on the other one. So. And the rest of this is kind of just going to go through what I just went through. So you can read through that on your own if you want. So that was the tutorial called Introspection. I'm going to stop this one. The next one we're going to do before we take a break, because this is a really short, small one, Doesn't really do very much. I talked about the web, and I gave you a web view before lunch. And I wanted to show you this one kind of to fill in some blanks on getting data from the internet. You don't actually have to take it and put it into a web view. You can go out to the internet. You can actually, a lot of people do this through PHP. They'll put a PHP script on the internet that will query a database, generate some results, and then your app just goes and grabs the results. So it's part functionality on the internet, part functionality in the app. This is before all the web services for the cloud services, excuse me, and some of the other stuff came out. You can still do this. It still works this way just fine. In this tutorial, what we're going to do, there's a file out there. There's a file out there on the website. It's at vhacker.com. The file is called testpage.html. I'm just trying to make sure I can get to it right now, so I just clicked on it. And here it is. It's an HTML file. If I, how do you view source here? Page style, zoom. Anybody remember how to view source? HTML page, page info, web developer, I think it's in here. Page source. Here we go. It's a text file I put out there. I put an HTML extension on it. You don't have to be a web developer to understand this. It's just regular old HTML code. I stuck that out there on the internet. So what I'm going to do is read this file from my app. I'm going to go out to this URL, read this file, parse the information, and stick it into my app. So instead of loading it into a web view, I'm going to grab this stuff. So if this were a PHP script as an example and it was returning a value, and it was like a list of values or something that came out of it, I can grab those values, stick them in my app, and pull it from some online source of some sort. So not using JSON, it's not using any third-party utilities, it's just doing it raw with the HTML code and Objective-C language. So let's see how it's done. That's the page. So the page is live, and I leave the test page up there, but I need to test it occasionally just to make sure it's still there. Sometimes I accidentally remove stuff I don't. Oh, what do we need that for? Get rid of it. All right, so this one is going to actually parse out the HTML tags for us. So if you're using XML, and here's the interesting thing. So tools like, not JSON, but you can actually do it with JSON. A lot of the data pooling tools will put the data in an XML format, like Facebook posts and things. And what you're looking at is a wrapper on this. So you don't actually have to write your own class to generate the XML code to query the information from a database or from some sort of an internet source, some Facebook utility or something. Because XML is a really great data transfer language. It's a mock-up language for data versus text, HTML. So I'm really applying this because this is more easily seen with HTML. I'm applying it with HTML, but it's really an XML application for the most part. So you can do this with XML or HTML in terms of your tag component. That's what your page looks like. So we're going to create a new app, and we're going to call it Parse HTML. So I'm going to click on the Xcode here and create a new app, but do a single view application. And this one I'm going to call it Parse. I'll just call it Parse Me. Parse Me or Parse HTML or whatever it is you want to call it. And I'm going to create an iPhone app. And I'm going to put it on the desktop. Well, they're getting pretty wild next door. They had a guest speaker earlier. Here's some noise next door. I see, at least it's entertaining up here. So let's see, I got my main storyboard out here, and let's go see what we're going to look with. So we created our app. And this is an old tutorial, so don't bother with the screenshots. I got to pull some of this stuff out. We're going to create a class that's going to handle all of our parsing utilities. So instead of dragging somebody else's class in there, we're just going to create our own because we know how to write Objective-C code. So we're going to inherit from NSObject, which is the interesting part. So we're going to, this is an iOS app, by the way. We're going to take a not touched, just a regular old NSObject from regular old Objective-C, not even iOS oriented, do something with it, stuff it into our app. You could do it with C++, you could do it with C, you can do it with Objective-C. You can do it with anything you want, which is how all those APIs are written. They're not written for iOS. They're written in a utility like Objective-C or C++. They're written in a language. They're created in terms of class objects. We're just going to inherit from NSObject. So name it HTML element. It's going to represent the HTML element. And inherit it from NSObject. This is like creating person in that first app that we did yesterday, actually. So file, new, file, and Coca-Touch. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to click on Coca-Touch. I can, or I can just click on OSX Coca if I want to. And actually, let's just do Coca. It doesn't really need to do that anyway. Objective-C class, press next. See where it says employee. Take out employee. I don't know why it says employee there because that's the last one I did. Put NSObject in there. And I'm going to call this one, I'm going to make sure I make this the same here. It's called the HTML element. So let me call it that. HTML element. Now there's not going to be an option because it's from NSObject. There's no UI to it. Instead it's going to be a data class. It's just going to store data for me. And I'm going to store it in my project, parse me. Here it is. So I have an HTML element.m and a .h file. This is what we did yesterday with person and employee. It's a regular old class object. Alright, so our new object will have 2 strings in it. We're going to have a tag and we're going to have a value because we're going to parse XML or HTML code. So there's a tag and there's a value for the tag, which is essentially the concept. So we're going to add to the HTML element H. This should say 2 instead of toe. 2 properties. And the 2 properties we're going to add are 2 strings. So remember yesterday I said I was going to show you how to add properties without adding them as data elements, but just as regular old properties. Here we go. We've done this before, but here's just yet another example. So the equivalent of this, and this is the interesting thing because I'm using retain instead of weak, which may or may not necessarily be needed for what we're doing. Retain is basically, weak is going to garbage collect it, make it available when it goes out of scope. Retain is not going to garbage collect it. It's going to stay around for the life of the object, life of the program. Why? Because once we parse everything with key value sets, we're going to want to get back at these keys and values because we're going to make a new instance of each object that's going to hold a key and a value for each one of the elements we're going to find in that HTML or that XML page that we're going to parse. So long story short, we're retaining them. They're both NS strings. One's a tag, one's a value. So naturally over here on the .m, we're going to synthesize it. So you're going to go at synthesize, and this is going to be the tag and the value. So we got a tag and a value. And we're not using any GUI component. We're just doing this by regular old object components. So the only thing we need to do is do the synthesize for the tag and the value in the implementation file. So open it up, add those 2 things there. Next we're going to create a parser class. The parser class is going to create instances of these HTML elements when it parses. So this would be simply a subclass of NSObject, just like before. So this one's going to be called HTML Parser. So let's go back up to here. And click on File, New, File. And again, we can use the Coca. We don't have to actually use Coca-Touch. It's going to be the same thing, really. Objective-C, because we're not going to use the interface. And this is going to be called HTML Parser from NSObject. So now we have an HTML Parser class and with a .h and a .m. And in the HTML Parser class, we're going to need to import HTML element because HTML Parser is going to create some instances of HTML elements for us. And the instances are going to be the tag and the value we have for the tag, which is pretty cool. So we're going to hold on to these guys in here. So we're going to import at the beginning. We're going to import HTML element.h. So open up HTML Parser.h. add to the top, because we're going to use an element inside of the parser. So import here HTML elements. Alright, that looks pretty good. So all this needs to implement the Xml Parser Delegate protocol. So the protocol is it's like an interface. It's a preset interface. We did this the first weekend actually, but it was 2 months ago, which is the problem with the weekend classes. Anyway, but long story short, we're going to add this protocol to the interface line to use the protocol. So it goes right after NS object in our implementation. So we saw this actually earlier with a protocol we did for the navigator, I believe, or one of the other ones, navigation controller. So it's kind of the same concept. It's going to add a bunch of methods to this implementation that's going to be used for XML, NS XML parser, because remember I told you what we're doing for HTML you can do with XML. It's actually originally designed for XML. Put an XML page out there on the internet, you transfer the data from a form, it goes into this parser, it pulls out the information, you process it. So it's a XML processing. NS because it's next step, so it's Xml Parser Delegate for parsing functions that are pre-built in here. We're just going to reuse it. So we're going to use the protocol in the class implementation. So we're going to put this on the line here. Add the following 4 properties and 1 method prototype. So we're going to add some properties. This is going into HTML Parser. It's going to be properties used by the parser. We're going to need to keep track of the current node content. We're going to need to create an element array. Well, it's going to be an NS mutable array for the elements that we're going to find in the file. We're just going to take all the elements, put them in an array. And then we're going to have a HTML element that's going to be called a current HTML element that's going to have the information for the key and the value that is of the data type HTML, which is why we're importing and why we're using HTML element. So it's going to be an object inside of an object. So I think that was a bus that went by the railing there. This room gets the afternoon sun and the shadows that come along with it. Alright, so inside of the interface, go ahead and add here these properties, and the properties, oops, looks like I got wrapped a little bit. I think they're having some contest or next time. I almost feel like going over there and see what's going on. All the clapping. Doesn't it look like they're playing some game or something? I mean, that sounds like fun over there. Alright, so, and we have this method prototype here. Go ahead and add this one too. This is going to be a URL string that's going to be sent to a load HTML by URL. Oops. So let's go ahead and load that one in here. So we have a method prototype, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 properties that we created for our HTML parser class. And our HTML parser class is going to use an HTML element inside of it. So I'm looking pretty good. So let's go back here. Now we're going to go open up the M file, the implementation file, synthesize the properties that we created. So I'm going to copy the synthesized lines here over and stick it inside of HTML Parser.m. Get rid of this side here. There we go. So I've synthesized the properties. Now we need to add the implementation of that method that we put the prototype in there for. And the method prototype, we called it load HTML by URL. So let's take a look and see what this is doing here. Just like we created the web view in the last example before lunch, we have this URL. So it's an NS URL that stands for a URL. And we're going to create a URL with a string. So it's URL with string. We're going to provide it a URL string. In the view did load, we're going to create the URL string that's going to go to that website, that bhacker.com, and it's going to load up the test.html file. And then we're going to have a data component. So it's going to be an NS data, which is actually kind of a, this is interesting. It's just like a data dump. It's data. It's really generic, actually. Other stuff comes from data, like integers and floats and doubles, and so they're all data. But NS data is kind of a base object. We're going to just create some NS data because we don't know what we're getting. from this URL. And it's going to be initialized with the contents of the URL. So we're going to take the URL, dump the data that's in the URL, which is in that text file, stick it in the NS data. This is how we get stuff from the web, by the way. So if we're going to go dump a website, dump a web page, in this particular case, what we're doing, get some data, you know, a file or something, could be done the same way. It's NS data. It's a generic data type. Allocate it, initialize it with the contents of the URL. Here's the URL. We're going to hard set the URL earlier on. Then we're going to create an element array. And the element array is going to include, well, it's going to be of the data type NS mutable array. And the parser is going to create a new instance of the parser. The parser is going to be an NS XML Parser, which is the class we created. It's going to be initialized with the data from the data. That's okay. You can sit over there. No. What's wrong? You don't want to let him sit over there? I'll just sit there. He doesn't want to sit here. I know, because I'm going to pick on him again. I'm not going to pick on you. It's okay. But thank you for sitting way over there. I'm just kidding. I don't smell anything. No. All right. You went home, took a shower, and came back. Washed all the flowers out of your hair. Just kidding. I'm going to get in trouble one of these days. Parser.delegate is equal to self. Parser page. See, I don't pick on him too. I pick on everybody. He quit smoking as of yesterday. Current HTML element is going to be equal to HTML element alloc. We're making instances of this stuff. We're going to take the data that we get from the URL. We're going to put it in the NS data object. We're going to take the NS data object and use it somehow. We haven't going to start using it yet. We're just loading it. So we get it from, this is the method. So we're going to load the HTML by the URL. So go ahead and copy this one. Stick it inside of the implementation over here. Oops. Let me take the whole thing, actually. This is going into HTML Parser.m. There we go. So we got HTML Parser.m is the implementation of HTML Parser. And next we need to implement 3 methods to follow the delegate, the Parser Delegate protocol. So remember the protocol we added. We're going to add the methods that abide by it. And here are the methods. We got parser. That's going to take essentially an element, did start element with a string, namespace URL, qualified name. We're going to have all these attributes that are going to be associated with the elements themselves. And then we're going to allocate a new HTML element for each one of the elements. And so we have another method here, parser, that's going to take on an XML parser that is going to implement, and here we go, it's going to implement an element if it's equal to title, if it is equal to H1, if it is equal to P. These might look familiar to you. I'm not going to go over all of them. Div. They're all the same method. For each one of the tags we're going to look for in the file, we're going to parse it out. If the element name is equal to the string that's associated with this, and these look like, well, if you don't know anything about HTML, these are HTML tags. If you've seen HTML before, you know that these are HTML tags. They very well could have been XML tags. Since this is used for HTML or XML, it's a tagging process, so the opening and closing tag. So we keep track of the tag, see what is the element. If it is, then we get the value for it. So the title is this, the header is that. And we're just going through a bunch of if-the-else statements to parse out to see what it is we have for each one of the tags that we put into the file. And then we're going to take the characters that are found for the tags and write them as the values. So we have the tag value combinations that are going to show up in a box. They're going to show up in a list box, actually. It's going to show up on our screen. So the rest of the work is going to be done in the view controller. So before I move on, I want to copy these implemented methods to the .m file of the parser, HTML parser, to implement the protocol methods. Oops, make sure I get them all. And I'm going to stick them underneath the main one here. So I'm still in parser, HTML Parser.m. And, oops, no, there's a hotkey. No. Well, there was a hotkey to reformat, but that's, I think that's Android, not, well, that looks like it's working now. I don't know if that hotkey worked or not. Anyway, I don't actually think it did work. There was a hotkey to reformat it, kind of like Eclipse. I don't know if the hotkey worked or if it just miraculously fixed itself. But long story short, it pasted code in here. So now I'm actually done with this particular file. Let me get rid of the spaces at the end there. And now I'm going to go to the viewcontroller.h file, where we're going to set the UI experience to use these classes. So the rest of the work is going to be done in the view controller, and the header needs to be imported for the parser. So we're going to import the HTML Parser.h. So I'm going to copy it out of here and stick it in here. So I've got HTML Parser.h. And then now we're going to make the view controller a subclass of the UI table view controller instead of the UI view controller. Now this is going to be an interesting thing because now we're going to add a table view. Because remember I was talking about earlier the text view, the web view. We're just going to subclass now from a different view. So if we make that, I'm going to copy this here and change the view controller here. So instead of UI view controller that just gives us the blank view, if we put in here table view controller, we get one that gives us a table. I'm going to look at that in a few minutes and see how that differs a little bit when we see the UI for it. Then we're going to make a new property for an instance of the HTML parser because we want to use the HTML parser in there. So property is going to be of the type HTML parser. So I'm going to put it in here. So we got a table view now instead of a regular view controller. And we got an HTML parser instance that we're going to create right here. It's going to be a property of it. Very similar to making a new instance of it, but we're going to make a property of it, which is the same thing as an instance. It's going to create the setters and getters for us. Now we're going to open up the viewcontroller.m and add the line to synthesize the parser. That's the no-brainer. And then the view did load is going to do most of the other work for us. So switch to the viewcontroller.m and synthesize the property that we created for the parser. HTML parser, there we go. So now in the view did load method, we're going to do very similar to what we did with the web view, but it's actually a little bit easier for us. So we're going to alloc the HTML parser, allocate the memory for, and initialize it, and pass it the URL to the HTML page, which is going to be load HTML URL, which is the method that we created. So parse is going to be equal to new parser alloc, and load HTML by URL. That's the method we created to in the parser to basically go out to a website, parse the information, put it in the data. Remember I was talking about the NS data? This is the method that takes and creates the NS data object out of the URL that we give it. And then set the title, self.title of this table view. We're going to set it to, because we're in a view controller right now, we're going to set it to HTML elements. So I'm just going to put these two lines inside of the view controller code over here. So I'm going to get rid of this comment underneath, put my view controller down here. And let's see what we got going on here. Very good. All right, so we're going to set our title to HTML element. There's our that's our test page. Now we're going to add a method for the table view and set the number of rows in each one of the sections to use the element array by adding the following code to it. So we're going to add this method because we're a table view. And we're not a UI controller anymore. We're a table view controller. We have properties that we can set, methods that we can use. This example here is to set the table rows. So the number of rows in section is going to be equal. Basically, we're going to take the HTML parser array that we have, go through the array of all the elements in the array and create a new row for each one of the elements. So the table view is going to basically just be a row of the array contents that we have by parsing it. So I'm going to go and copy this one and stick it in. This you can actually use as a generic way of creating a table view for yourself, a UI table view. When you see the table view, you go, oh, that's how you create the table view. Hopefully you'll see that. So everything else gets done in the cell 4 row at index path. So when you click on the rows, something will happen. Or when you load the data, you can put stuff in the rows for the cells. So we use a current HTML element by the array element, and then we use it to set the labels of the cells. So we're going to use this method to label the cells. So for our UI table view cell, for our table view, the cell for row at index, well, we're going to take our array elements, so index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, create a string, and the string identifier is going to be called cell. And then we're going to create a UI table view instance cell, lowercase. So the identifier is an uppercase cell. The lowercase is not really the best syntax here. The lowercase is going to be the object instance. So it's going to be a DQ reusable cell with identifier with the cell. So if cell is equal to nil, we're done. Otherwise, cell is going to be equal to the allocated table view cell. Add cells to the table view. So we can add table views that have cells with icons and images and text labels and a bunch of other stuff. The next tutorial will create a table view with multiple different items, multiple rows in a cell, and we'll add them to the table view. So we configure the cells here by looking at from their index, object at index, index past row, set the text of the cell label, so text label, set the details of the text, so we have a bigger label, little label. We'll see what it looks like in a few minutes. All we're doing is setting the information that's going to show up in the cells. So we need to actually copy this whole method into the code. And I'm going to stick it underneath. There we go. Alright, so the last step is, and this is what the finished product looks like. This is an old screenshot actually. This is the bigger label, this is the detail. So there's two components that end up in each one of these cells. And we can change the format. The cells look different. We can put lines in between the cells if we wanted to. And there's many different ways we can do this appearance-wise. But we're going to have basically the tag and the value combination as the detail, the text label and the detail text label. So that's where we get these two dot texts from. So last I was going to make sure we have the correct nib type for the project type. So we changed our UI view controller, and we changed it from UI view controller, we changed it to tab view controller. We didn't change anything on the XIV file. So we have to select the view controller, XIV, or the storyboard in our particular case. The other properties of the attribute inspector change the class, which is the third row over from the left, from a UI view to a UI table view. If we don't switch the class, we still have a UI view class associated with the view component instead of a table view. You don't do this, the project doesn't work. 9 times out of 10, generally when people have problems with table views, it's because they didn't change it over. So if you click on the storyboard, you click on the view component itself. Oops. I like to move the view over this way. You click on the attribute inspector over here. So I got it over here. I'm going to click on the class icon if I can find the class icon, and it's the class custom class is associated, but we need the hold on one second. I can find the link for it. Hold on. Let me identity. Find out where they moved it to. Let's see where it used to be, actually. Let me refresh my memory on where it used to be. Change the third icon from the left for the UI view. So third icon to the left. Here it is. Okay, so the custom class, it was in the This is the second icon now from the left, where it says UI view. This is where we want to change it to UI table view. Table view, that's the one we want right there. My problem is I was clicking originally on the outer. This is the view controller. You got to click on the view that's inside of the view controller. One of the biggest problems with Xcode is where did you click? So if you get the blue, the other key is the blue is the outer controller class. The inside is the view. So you have to actually click on the view to change the view. Where this one used to be called, I'll put it back. UI view. View. You got to change that view to table view. So the other, I guess the easier way of doing it would be to go this way with it. And it's no longer, it is the third one over. Oh, interesting. So I thought it was the second one, but it is the third icon from the left, which is this little blue icon right here. If you have problems figuring it out. Oops, not text view, it's going to be table view. Table view. There we go. So now that I have a table view over here, I should be able to see a table view when I run it. If I don't see a table view, I probably haven't checked it correctly. I mean, I have a UI view or some other view. So now we're going to run it and see what happens. So this is the page, testpage.html. When we run it, we're going to see crash, bang, failed, error message all over the place. No, actually. We're going to see this. We're going to see the title, and see how it's got rows in here. We can put the lines in, we can change the look and appearance of this, but we have a main title is going to be called HTML test page. H1 is the first header. So what you have are both of them looking here. You have the information that's out on the website. It's not pulling it from the website, however. It went out, took this file, testpage.html, made an NSData object out of it inside of the app. So the ping to the internet is just one, go get the file, bring it back. It's not reading it now, so you can change this information, do whatever it is you want to do with it inside of the app, not connected to the internet anymore. It's not a web view, which is the interesting part. So a lot of people will put XML files out there, go read them from the app. Takes you 2 seconds, you go out there, you grab the data, you bring it back in, you put it into the app, you use it for something, or you go the other direction, you put it back out. So you can take information from the app, fill out a form, hit a submit button, write a script, post it up, just like you do web, it's just like web development. Like when you have a submit button and you're posting HTTP protocol. Compatible. So long story short, is one approach to doing it, not the quickest and not the safest, not the most secure. Same problems you get with web development and forms as well. So you're going over an open internet connection, HTTP protocol. So then people package stuff up into other data protocols like JSON as an example that is used. In fact, if you're interested, and we're not going to cover it in this course, but if you're interested, JSON, and here we go. Just go here, iPhone. Tutorial, iOS 7. Fetch and parse JSON data, iOS programming tutorial. Actually, these guys are pretty good, app code. These guys are pretty good. If you're interested, well, they have meetups too. Here's another one, very similar to what I just did, but he's going to use JSON in a table view controller to load in, and this is going to be from a meetup API to bring in the data, put it from a website location, put it into the app, reformat it using a JSON control. And you see the, here we have the same kind of data exchange. So some of these guys, actually Meetup does it, Facebook does it, Twitter does it, I can't remember, there's a couple of other companies out there that do it. They create these little web services for you, where you create an account, you establish the format for your data, and it looks like this. You go out to the internet and you grab this data. Take this data, you don't even have to use JSON for this. You take this data, you parse it as an NSData component like we just saw a few minutes ago. You take it, parse it out, stick it into your app and use the data. It's just a data exchange method going back and forth. A couple of different ways of doing it. This is the JSON approach where you're not going to use like a web service. So, and in fact, you could probably run through this tutorial. It's actually pretty cool. So anyway, it goes a little bit. This is the next class, as I was mentioning before. We do a bunch of this other stuff if you take the iOS programming course. But this class is about Objective-C programming, so we're not going to do this. But actually, I'm going to save this bookmark. This is not bad, actually. So, questions on parsing data from the internet. And you can see this one actually works live. This is from a real website, actually. And if I put some, a script out there, I can go out, run a PHP script, and bring some data back. And the script's going to run from the server side. And I just call it from my app. It goes out, runs a script, gets the data, sends it back to my app. Here, we did a database, and here's the classes you're registered for. Oh, and here's what's available, which is a kind of easy way of exchanging data back and forth. It's slow. You got to go ask for it, go get it, return it. It's not like real-time update. You're not real-time updating, and you're not real-time updating it with JSON either. JSON is just packaging it for you in a more secure way. So you're not going over OpenLine. It's like the difference between using JavaScript and posting something. And, that's not very safe. Not the safest thing, especially if you're doing a client-side send on it. So, but long story short, that is what I have for you on this. So I think it's break time again. So let me stop this video.